The 9,203rd meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite Mr. Thor Wensland, Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, to participate in the meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to Mr. Thor Wensland.
Mr. President, members of the Security Council, each month I brief you in detail on the latest developments on the ground relevant to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Today, however, I wish to provide a broader perspective on the challenges we are facing while highlighting some potential ways forward for the parties and for the international community. A detailed update on the recent incidences and developments will be provided in the forthcoming report of the Secretary General on the implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 2334 in December. Mr. President, after decades of persistent violence, illegal settlement expansion, dormant negotiation, and deepening occupation, the conflict is again reaching a boiling point. High level of violence in the occupied West Bank and Israel in recent months, including attacks against Israeli and Palestinian civilians, increased use of arms, and settler-related violence have caused grave human suffering. This past week, I condemned bombings in Jerusalem that killed 2 Israelis, including a 16-year-old, and injured over a dozen more civilians. Such act of terrorism must be clearly rejected and condemned by all. Days before, I condemned a violent attack by Israeli settlers against Palestinians in Hebron that risk aggravating an already tense situation. All have a responsibility to act against extremists and to speak out against such act of violence and incitement. Let me reiterate that the targeting of civilians can never be justified and the violence must stop. This surge of violence in the occupied Palestinian territory is taking place in the context of stalled peace process and entrenched occupation, and amidst mounting economic and institutional challenges faced by the Palestinian Authority. Global trends and declining donor supports have compounded these challenges alongside an absence of democratic renewal for the Palestinian people. In Gaza, the fragile calm was recently interrupted by the launching of 4 rockets towards Israel by Palestinian militants and subsequent airstrikes by Israeli defense forces against what is said was Hamas targets. Once again, we are reminded that the mix of militant activity, debilitating closures, absence of the legitimate Palestinian government, and hopelessness create an ever-present risk of escalation. Mr. President, I remain focused on addressing both the immediate threats to stability and to the longer-term objectives of my mandate. In the occupied West Bank, my team and I have in the recent weeks visited areas where violence have been severe, and I continue to hold discussions with a range of Palestinian and Israeli officials, as well as international and regional actors, to address the dangerous dynamics. In Gaza, the UN worked closely again alongside regional and international partners to mediate and support ceasefire in May 2021 and earlier this year in August. The UN leads the humanitarian response and has helped put in place measures to support Gaza economy, including improvements to movement and access in and out of Gaza for people and goods. Critical projects such as providing fuel, to the Gaza power plant and cash assistance to more than 100,000 needy families is ongoing and will continue in 2023. In this regard, progress has been made. Israel has approved the highest number of permits for Palestinians from Gaza to work in Israel since 2007, and the entry of a number of dual-use materials from Israel for the first time in more than a decade. Nevertheless, restrictions and delays continue to negatively impact humanitarian and development efforts, as well as important sectors of the economy, and much more remains to be done. These preventive and de-escalating measures and diplomatic engagements have helped maintain calm on ground and provide some space for progress, but without tangible movement on the political track, their benefits are likely to be short-lived. Mr. President, while it may seem that events on the ground are stuck in a never-ending cycle, the truth is that nothing in this conflict is static. Freezing the conflict or permanently managing it is not a viable option. As violence mounts, settlement expansion and restrictions continue to squeeze the economic and physical space for developing a viable Palestinian state. Meanwhile, demography is moving faster than politics. In a few years, exponential population growth in West Bank and Gaza will make it increasingly difficult, if not impossible, to manage the economic, political, and security situation. The Palestinian authorities is already facing significant institutional and financial challenges. Palestinians have not voted in general elections since 2006, and more than 50% of the electorate, those between 18 and 35, has never had a chance to make their voice heard by the ballots. This is taking place against the backdrop of changing dynamics in the region, shifting international priorities, and more recently, the fallout of the conflict in Ukraine, which have significantly reduced the attention paid to this conflict. The optimism, hope, and vocal support for a negotiated political solution that were so palpable when the peace process began have now dimmed, especially given the lack of political progress since the unsuccessful rounds of talks in 2007 and 2014. The principles that underpin the Oslo Accords are slipping away. Political leadership is required to reset the trajectory towards a two-state solution. Failing to address the underlying causes of the conflict, together with these trends I mentioned for you, demonstrating a clear political path forward where conflict will only escalate, causing more bloodshed and misery, and it will, in a very sincere way, have a destabilizing effect in the entire region. The current trends bring neither stability nor security to anyone. Mr. President, for this reason, it is necessary to take some urgent steps toward a two-state solution, which will still garner considerable support among Palestinians and Israelis. Through incremental but tangible steps, we can build a bridge between where we are now and the conditions necessary for a peaceful resolution of the conflict based on the UN resolutions, international law, and previous agreements. First, we must continue to engage with the parties to reduce tension and counter negative trends, particularly those impacting final status issues. This will involve denying the violence and incitements and holding perpetrators accountable. This means that both sides stop unilateral steps that undermine peace, including settlement expansion or legalization, demolitions, and displacements. This means upholding status quo on the holy sites in accordance with the special and historic role of Jordan. Secondly, we must continue to improve access, movement, and trade to create room for Palestinian economy to grow. Specifically, steps should be taken to increase access for Palestinians to land and resources in Area C in the West Bank, enabling crucial Palestinian development, and to increase permits for Palestinians to work in Israel. In Gaza, a further and more comprehensive approach to easing restrictions on the movement of people and goods is needed. Relinking the economic of Gaza to the West Bank should be a related critical objective. Ultimately, ending the debilitating closure of addressing Gaza's challenges require political solution in line with UN Security Council Resolution 1860. Third, efforts are needed by all parties and the international communities to strengthen Palestinian institutions, improve governance, and shore up fiscal health of the Palestinian Authority. The PA's political legitimacy and accountability must also be strengthened through democratic reforms and opening of the civic space, holding elections across OPT, and ensuring the effectiveness and credibility of the Palestinian security forces. Without implementing point 1 and 2, this will not be possible. These steps seek to enable the parties to move past ad hoc efforts focused on security and economic matters and towards meaningful engagement on more fundamental political issues. While they are intended to have immediate concrete benefits for Palestinians and Israelis, these priorities are anchored to a broader political framework that advances us towards two states. Mr. President, I recognize that under the current circumstances, advancing such steps will be a formidable task. Fundamental issues need to be addressed by the parties. A common approach where the two-state solution is the guiding political direction is essential to halting the current negative trajectory. It will require a redoubled commitment from the international community as well, and resources and engagement with the parties despite of the global challenges. Clearly, circumstances have changed in the 3 decades since Israel and Palestinians first embarked on the peace process. Neither can turn away from the realities of geography and demography that are reshaping the landscape, which, when combined with a fast expanding settlement east of the 67 line, reflects an increased friction points and a deepening conflict. Such a direction has full support from the international community. In this regard, UN plays a critical role in anchoring and affirming the international consensus on how this conflict will ultimately be resolved. The establishment of 2 states living side by side in peace and security on the basis of the 67 lines in line with UN resolutions, international law, and previous agreements. This consensus is based on the recognition that both Palestinians and Israelis have deep national, religious, cultural, and historic ties to their homeland, and that both have a right to self-determination in form of a viable, contiguous, independent state of their own. Ultimately, only Palestinians and Israelis can together determine this future. But the UN and the international community, including through regional and international frameworks, must support parties in moving towards a political horizon aligned with the core principle outlined above. Despite the bleakness of this moment, and in fact because of it, I encourage all of us to recommit to these ambitious but achievable goals. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Wensland for his briefing. And I give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Special Coordinator Wensland, for your briefing. I want to start by condemning in the strongest possible terms the terrorist attacks in Jerusalem last week. I echo Secretary Blinken in expressing our condolences to the families of the men who were killed and wish all those injured a speedy recovery. We stand with the Israeli people in the face of these heinous attacks. Let me be clear, there is no justification for violence directed at civilians. That includes the November 15th terrorist attack in a settlement that killed 3 Israelis and the violence committed by settlers in Hebron on November 19th. Anyone who commits a violent act, Israeli or Palestinian, must face equal justice. It must be clear that no individual or group is above the law. Colleagues, the United States is deeply concerned about the sharp escalation in violence and tension between Israelis and Palestinians. This has been the deadliest year in the West Bank since 2004. Nearly 150 Palestinians and 28 Israelis have been killed. Amid these heightened tensions, it is all the more critical that Israelis and Palestinians refrain from unilateral actions, including settlement activity, evictions, and the demolition of Palestinian homes, incitement to violence, such as payments to the families of terrorists, and disruption of the historic status quo of holy sites. These actions only take us further away from a negotiated two-state solution, which remains the best way to ensure Israel's future security and prosperity and fulfill Palestinians' desires for a state of their own. Israelis and Palestinians equally deserve to live safely and securely and enjoy equal measures of freedom, justice, dignity, and prosperity. And we have said many times, there is no shortcut to the vision of 2 states. This can only be achieved through direct negotiations between the Palestinians and the Israelis. It is incumbent on both parties to work in good faith toward this goal. And while the international community cannot impose peace on the parties, we have an important role to play in improving the well-being of Palestinians, the security of Israelis, and the stability of the larger region. These efforts can help create the conditions for meaningful negotiations aimed at resolving the conflict. Unfortunately, most UN actions related to Israelis and Palestinians are not designed to advance direct negotiations, let alone achieve peace. They're only intended to denigrate Israel. Indeed, the UN system is replete with anti-Israel actions and bodies, including biased and disproportionate resolutions against Israel across the UN system. The lopsided focus on Israel at the United Nations, including the open-ended Commission of Inquiry and the recent request for an advisory opinion at the International Court of Justice, has brought Israelis and Palestinians no closer to peace. Instead of grandstanding and pursuing unproductive measures, we hope the UN will start focusing on the kinds of concrete steps that can improve the lives of Palestinians and Israelis and preserve the viability of 2 states living side by side in peace and security. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United States for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Special Coordinator Wensland, for your thoughtful briefing. The UK is gravely concerned by the increasing instability in the West Bank and Jerusalem. Since the 14th of November, 4 Israelis have lost their lives in terror attacks in the city of Ariel and in Jerusalem, including a 16-year-old. There's no justification for this violence. During this time, 2 Palestinian minors have also been killed in the West Bank, including a 15-year-old. 142 Palestinians have now been killed by Israeli security forces since the 1st of January, the most in a single year since UN records began in 2005. In the same period, 30 Israelis have also lost their lives. Each life lost is a tragedy for all communities, particularly the families affected. So this ongoing conflict needs to be resolved for the sake of all Israelis and Palestinians alike. The UK stands ready to support the new Israeli administration and the Palestinian Authority to de-escalate and address the root drivers of conflict. The UK remains fully supportive of Israel's right to self-defense, but Israeli security forces should show maximum restraint in the use of force and investigate all Palestinian deaths. We urge both parties to engage in meaningful dialogue, refrain from escalatory actions, and work to restore trust and a pathway towards peace and a resolution of this conflict. The UK shares the concern of others at scenes of settler violence perpetrated against Palestinians in Hebron in recent days. Settler violence must end, and we call upon Israel to hold those responsible to account. We condemn the demolition by Israel of a primary school in Masafah Yatta. Mr. President, all children have a basic right to access education safely, and we call on the government of Israel to uphold these rights. Finally, I urge Israel and the Palestinian Authority to accelerate efforts to improve the economic and humanitarian conditions in the West Bank and Gaza. I welcome ongoing dialogue to address PA clearance revenues and call for the parties to honour their recent AHLC commitments. The UK remains a firm supporter of a two-state solution based on 1967 lines, with Jerusalem as a shared capital, as the only way to ensure a lasting peace between the parties. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Mexico.
Muchas gracias, presidente. Agradecemos la presentación del coordinador especial Thor Wensland. Mi delegación sigue con preocupación los últimos desarrollos en Israel y Palestina. El diagnóstico presentado por el coordinador especial Wensland confirma que nos encontramos ante una situación muy frágil, con riesgo de escalar a una mayor. Los recientes incidentes evocan las olas de violencia de los últimos años, por lo que es necesario respaldar todo aquello que conlleve un carácter de disuasión preventiva. México condena los ataques perpetrados el pasado 23 de noviembre en Jerusalén, donde falleció un joven israelí y más de 20 personas resultaron heridas. Al mismo tiempo, mi país deplora cualquier amenaza que atente contra el territorio y la población israelí, así como el lanzamiento de cohetes desde Gaza. Reconocemos las legítimas preocupaciones de seguridad de Israel, pero reiteramos al mismo tiempo que las agencias de seguridad israelíes deben observar los principios de necesidad, proporcionalidad y distinción de conformidad con el derecho internacional humanitario. El uso recurrente de municiones letales contra civiles contraviene dichos principios. También resulta inadmisible la retención de los restos mortales de cualquier persona, pues significa una forma de castigo colectivo que impide a las familias honrar la memoria de quienes han fallecido. Encomiamos las gestiones de autoridades y líderes sociales en Jenin para devolver el cuerpo del joven druso sustraído la semana pasada y exhortamos la entrega inmediata de todos los restos aún retenidos. Igualmente, reprobamos los ataques recurrentes perpetrados por colonos israelíes, como los sucedidos en Hebrón el 19 de noviembre pasado. Hacemos eco del llamado que ha hecho el coordinador especial e instamos a líderes políticos y sociales a abstenerse de instigar a la violencia y usar retórica inflamatoria. La construcción de asentamientos resulta ilegal de conformidad con el derecho internacional. Por eso llamamos a cesar su construcción y su expansión, así como los desalojos, desplazamientos, decomisos y demoliciones de estructuras palestinas. Las demoliciones de escuelas, como la que ocurrió en Masafer Yatta, atentan contra el derecho de la población palestina a la educación y aumentan los agravios que dificultan el regreso al diálogo. La renovación del mandato del Organismo de Obras Públicas y de Socorro de Naciones Unidas para los Refugiados de Palestina en el Cercano Oriente, UNRWA, sin duda ofrecerá certidumbre para la planeación de sus labores. Subrayamos que la UNRWA requiere contar con financiamiento previsible que permita ofrecer de forma consistente asistencia humanitaria y servicios básicos a más de 5 millones de refugiados palestinos en Líbano, Siria, Jordania y Palestina. En el capítulo político instamos al próximo gobierno israelí a mantener y profundizar la cooperación en materia civil, fiscal y de seguridad con la autoridad palestina. De igual forma, reiteramos nuestro llamado para que, en línea con la Declaración de Argel, la autoridad palestina convoque a elecciones presidenciales y legislativas en el territorio palestino ocupado, incluido Jerusalén Oriental. Presidente, para concluir, subrayo que solo una solución negociada podrá poner fin a los ciclos recurrentes de violencia que afectan la estabilidad de toda la región. Las partes del conflicto tienen la responsabilidad de retomar el proceso político para atender las causas estructurales de la violencia y avanzar hacia la reconciliación. Por su parte, la comunidad internacional tenemos la obligación de promover y acompañar dicho proceso. En vista de lo anterior, México refrenda su respaldo a toda iniciativa que contribuya a la solución de dos estados, con Jerusalén como la capital de ambos, de conformidad con las resoluciones pertinentes de las Naciones Unidas. Solo de esta forma será posible sentar las bases para la reconciliación y propiciar una paz sostenible en Medio Oriente. Muchas gracias.
I thank the representative of Mexico for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of India.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank UN Special Coordinator Thor Wensland for his briefing. India condemns the twin terror attacks that took place in Jerusalem on November 23. Our condolences to the victims' family, and we wish the injured a speedy recovery. We reiterate that terrorism is a global threat and that only a unified and zero-tolerance approach to terrorism can eventually defeat it. Mr. President, India has emphasized that only a negotiated two-state solution leading to the establishment of a sovereign, independent, and viable state of Palestine, taking into consideration Israel's legitimate security concerns, can deliver lasting peace. In this regard, India continues to reiterate the need for an early resumption of direct peace negotiations between the parties on all final status issues. The absence of such negotiations and the lack of a clear political horizon for the peaceful resolution of the conflict has consequences for both Israel and Palestine. It risks the recurrence of the cycle of violence, which will only increase the number of civilian casualties on both sides. All parties, Mr. President, must protect civilians, especially women and children. We urge the parties to cease violence and avoid unilateral actions on the ground which undercut the viability of the two-state solution. This will help in bridging the trust deficit between the parties. On our part, Mr. President, India remains committed to supporting all efforts to resume direct negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians to achieve a two-state solution. On the occasion of the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people, the Prime Minister of India, Shri Narendra Modi, has extended his best wishes to the people of Palestine in their endeavor for statehood, peace, and prosperity. In his message, he has also reaffirmed our long-standing relationship with the Palestinian people based on deep-rooted historical and people-to-people ties. Thank you.
I thank the representative of India for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of China.
谢谢主席先生。主席先生，我首先感谢温尼斯兰德特别协调员刚才所做的通报。中方对巴勒斯坦被占领土持续恶化的安全局势深感担忧。近一个时期，以色列安全部队搜捕行动日益频繁。 约旦河西岸暴力冲突持续蔓延，平民伤亡数字不断的攀升。根据联合国统计，今年是2005年以来，约旦河西岸巴勒斯坦人因冲突死亡人数最多的一年。很多巴勒斯坦儿童的生命在绽放前凋零，比如在16岁生日的前一天。 被枪杀的夫朗，以色列平民的伤亡同样令人痛心。中方谴责被占领土上一切针对平民的无差别袭击，谴责针对儿童的严重侵害，反对安全部队过度使用武力，呼吁对有关暴力事件进行调查，并确保追责。 以色列和巴勒斯坦是搬不走的邻居，安全相互依存，不可分割。将一方安全建立在另一方不安全的基础上，就无法打破暴力循环，走出安全困境。国际社会要同等重视巴以的安全关切，鼓励双方通过对话合作。 找到最大的公约数，实现共同安全。同时，占领方也应当切实履行保护被占领土上民众安全的国际法义务。主席先生，改善巴勒斯坦经济人道状况刻不容缓。本月，加沙地带 杰巴利叶难民营发生的严重火灾，夺去了20多人的生命。在以色列长达15年的封锁之下，加沙基础设施薄弱，电力和能源短缺，医疗资源匮乏，200多万加沙民众生活困顿不已。在约旦河西岸， 大量土地被以色列划为军事训练区或其他用途，事实上排除了巴勒斯坦开展建设、经济和发展活动的可能。我们呼吁以色列放松对加沙地带人员和人道、重建物资进出的限制，尽快解除对加沙的封锁围困。 并切实为约旦河西岸巴勒斯坦社区的发展创造条件。国际社会要多渠道向巴勒斯坦提供援助，助力巴方缓解财政危机，保障公共服务，发展经济，改善民生。 中方欢迎联大四委通过决议，延长联合国近东巴勒斯坦难民救济和工程处的授权，支持工程处继续向巴勒斯坦难民提供救济帮扶。持续扩张的定居点活动蚕食巴勒斯坦的土地，侵吞巴勒斯坦的资源，侵犯巴勒斯坦自决权，让一个领土连贯、独立、主权的巴勒斯坦国更加遥不可及。我们敦促以色列按照安理会第2334号决议的要求，停止一切定居点活动，包括停止强拆巴勒斯坦人房屋，停止对马萨菲尔亚塔等地区民众的驱逐威胁，回到两国方案的正确轨道上来。主席先生，1947年的11月，联大通过第181号决议，规定在巴勒斯坦设立一个犹太国家和阿拉伯国家。75年过去了，巴勒斯坦问题仍然没有解决。巴勒斯坦人民的民族自决、独立建国等不可剥夺权利仍然未能实现，各种原因需要深刻反思。支持巴勒斯坦人民，最根本的是还他们一个迟迟还没有到来的公道正义。国际社会应当始终把巴勒斯坦问题置于国际议程的优先位置，继续坚持两国方案不动摇，为推动巴以双方重启平等对话提供更多的助力。中方支持联合国、阿盟、伊斯兰合作组织和有重要影响的国家发挥更加积极的作用，形成更广泛、更有效的促和努力。安理会必须以时不我待的紧迫感，在推进两国方案方面采取实质性的步骤，支持巴勒斯坦人民恢复并行使不可剥夺权利。在关系到巴勒斯坦人民前途命运的问题上，任何人都没有否决权。最后，我愿重申，中国支持建立以1967年边界为基础，以东耶路撒冷为首都，拥有完全主权、独立的巴勒斯坦国，支持巴勒斯坦和以色列的和平共处，阿拉伯和犹太两大民族的共同发展。中方愿同国际社会一道，践行真正的多边主义，推动巴勒斯坦问题全面、公正、持久解决，早日实现中东地区安全稳定、发展繁荣。谢谢你，主席先生。
I thank the representative of China for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of France.
Monsieur le Président, je remercie le coordonnateur spécial pour son exposé. Comme il l'a indiqué, le risque d'escalade sur le terrain est réel et la France appelle les parties à la retenue. Elle condamne avec la plus grande fermeté les 2 attentats qui ont frappé Jérusalem le 23 novembre. Elle réitère son soutien constant à la sécurité d'Israël et sa détermination à rester engagée pour lutter contre le terrorisme. Nous condamnons également la mort de nombreux civils palestiniens cette année, dont la journaliste Shirin Abu Akleh et plusieurs enfants. Nous rappelons que la protection des civils pendant les opérations militaires est une obligation au titre du droit international humanitaire. La poursuite inacceptable des mesures unilatérales éloigne chaque jour un peu plus la perspective d'une solution à 2 États. La France condamne la politique de colonisation israélienne dont relèvent les démolitions et les évictions de familles palestiniennes qui se poursuivent en dépit des appels répétés des membres de ce Conseil. Nous condamnons la destruction par Israël la semaine dernière d'une école à Massafer Yatta. Les enfants palestiniens ont le droit d'avoir accès à l'éducation. Au moment où le nouveau gouvernement israélien est en train d'être formé, la France l'appelle à ne pas relancer les projets d'extension ou de création de colonies, notamment à Jérusalem-Est et à ses alentours, et à ne pas procéder à la légalisation des colonies sauvages. En 2020, la France et ses partenaires européens avaient mis en garde à plusieurs reprises contre l'annexion de certaines parties de la Cisjordanie et les colonies. Notre position demeure inchangée. La France rappelle que la colonisation est illégale et qu'elle remet en cause la solution des deux États, à laquelle les deux parties ont réaffirmé leur soutien devant l'Assemblée générale en septembre dernier. Monsieur le Président, pour sortir de cette dynamique, il faut recréer un horizon politique afin de donner à nouveau espoir aux Israéliens et aux Palestiniens qui aspirent à vivre en paix et en sécurité. Nous le savons, seule une solution à deux États vivant côte à côte en paix et en sécurité, ayant l'un et l'autre Jérusalem pour capitale, permettra d'apporter une paix juste et durable aux Israéliens, aux Palestiniens et dans toute la région. La France rappelle son attachement au statu quo historique sur les lieux saints de Jérusalem. Nous appelons donc ce Conseil à se mobiliser en faveur du lancement de pourparlers de paix dans les meilleurs délais. Les élections israéliennes ont eu lieu. Il faut désormais relancer rapidement les négociations directes entre les parties. La France est déterminée à agir en ce sens. Comme l'a indiqué le président Macron, nous n'avons pas d'autre alternative que de relancer les efforts de paix. La France soutiendra toute initiative visant à rassembler les parties autour de la table. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of France for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Спасибо, господин председатель. Благодарим Тора Венесланда за брифинг о ситуации на Ближнем Востоке, включая положение на оккупированных палестинских территориях. Символично, что наша сегодняшняя дискуссия проходит накануне Международного дня солидарности с палестинским народом. Очередная эскалация насилия в зоне палестино-израильского конфликта доказывает, что ситуация на оккупированных палестинских территориях будет оставаться взрывоопасной до тех пор, пока стороны не найдут взаимоприемлемые развязки по всем вопросам окончательного статуса с опорой на общепризнанную международно-правовую базу БУ, включая двугосударственную формулу. На фоне относительной стабилизации обстановки вокруг сектора Газа после военной операции Израиля в августе сего года, жертвами которой стали по меньшей мере 49 палестинцев, включая 17 детей, не спадают волнения на западном берегу реки Иордан. После израильской блокады и военных рейдов в Дженине началась зачистка Наблуса и лагеря беженцев Шойфат в Восточном Иерусалиме. По поступающей информации, в результате силовых акций Израиля на западном берегу реки Иордан в этом году уже погибло более 130 человек, что сделало его самым кровавым с 2005 года. На фоне подобного непропорционального применения силы на оккупированных палестинских территориях продолжаются односторонние действия по созданию необратимых фактов на земле. Строительство поселений, экспроприация палестинской собственности, снос домов, произвольные аресты, нарушение статус-кво святых мест Иерусалима. При этом произвольные противоправные действия Израиля выходят за рамки западного берега реки Иордан и сектора Газа, затрагивают соседние арабские страны с многочисленными эпизодами нарушения их суверенитета, в том числе для совершения ударов по территории Сирии и Ливана. Выступаем против подобной защиты национальной безопасности за счет создания угроз для других стран, а также превращения ближневосточного региона в арену заочного противостояния с Ираном. Одновременно мы решительно осуждаем атаки против мирных жителей, совершенные в Иерусалиме на прошлой неделе. Не просматриваются и перспективы реанимирования мирного процесса, замороженного с того же 2015 года. Палестинская проблема становится разменной картой в рамках череды предвыборных кампаний в Израиле, а из международной повестки дня ее активно выдавливает США, заблокировавшие усилия Ближневосточного квартета и принятие любых значимых решений в Совете Безопасности ООН. Кроме того, как мы сегодня услышали от спецкоординатора, БВУ страдает и из-за приоритизации США и их союзниками украинского кризиса. Сохранение раскола между Фатх и Хамас позволяет эксплуатировать тезис об отсутствии у Израиля единого партнера с палестинской стороны. В этой связи приветствуем подписание Алжирской декларации, в соответствии с которой палестинские фракции приняли совместное решение продолжить движение на пути к национальному единству. Считаем это важным шагом и подтверждением стремления палестинцев приступить к переговорам с общих позиций. Господин председатель, несмотря на декларативное стремление Израиля содействовать улучшению экономического положения палестинцев, общая социальная и гуманитарная обстановка на палестинских территориях продолжает деградировать. В этой связи придаем большое значение оказанию комплексного гуманитарного содействия нуждающимся на западном берегу реки Иордан и в секторе Газа, а также палестинским беженцам в соседних арабских странах. Разочаровывает отсутствие должной реакции на эту ситуацию со стороны специализированных агентств ООН и, прежде всего, сталкивающегося с парализующим дефицитом средств профильного БАПОР. Деятельность агентства имеет не только гуманитарное, но и политическое измерение, оказывая важный стабилизационный эффект на палестинских территориях и странах Ближнего Востока. Оказываем агентству неизменную политическую поддержку при продлении его мандата в Генассамблее ООН и подтверждаем готовность продолжить единовременные добровольные взносы. К сожалению, ввиду односторонних антироссийских санкций мы пока лишены возможности осуществить финансовый вклад в бюджет БАПОР. Тем не менее, Россия продолжит поддерживать агентство. Призываем к тому же все международное сообщество. Благодарю вас.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Kenya.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Special Coordinator Thor Wensland, for the briefing on the recent developments on the ground. The trajectory of events, including the heightened tensions and escalating violence, leading to fatalities of both Israeli and Palestinian civilians, including children, is deeply concerning. In particular, the deteriorating security situation in Nablus, Jenin, and the West Bank in general, and Jerusalem is alarming. Kenya strongly condemns the 23rd of November 2 bomb terrorist attacks in Jerusalem. Such acts, including the rocket launches from Gaza early this month, further reinforce that the pursuit of armed and militia groups, including Hamas, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and their affiliates, fall outside the path and principles of peace. We reiterate that no cause can justify the deliberate targeting of civilians, and all efforts must be geared to ensuring that these acts of terror come to a stop. Reports, including those from the United Nations Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, are clear that beyond security concerns, the current situation continues to have implications on the economy and humanitarian aid assistance in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem. As such, it is critical that the evolving situation be urgently addressed, including the underlying issues fueling the instability, before it reverberates to other areas. Kenya calls for enhanced analysis and contextualized reports to emanate from the good offices of the Secretary General to enable a better appreciation of the implications of these incidents in the maintenance of peace and security in the region in the immediate and long term. This would assist the Council to formulate a concrete and practical political pathway to end this protracted conflict. As we look to commemorate the UN International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people, this Council needs to urgently work on the needed building blocks to actualize the long-held goal of a region where two democratic states Israel and Palestine live side by side in peace and within secure and recognized borders based on the 1967 lines. The objective of a two-state solution would require of both parties a meaningful commitment to the peace process in alignment with the international law, the UN Charter, this Council's resolutions, and regional peace initiatives and frameworks. It also requires a willingness to compromise, a step-by-step approach that ensures real gains for both Israelis and Palestinians, and a commitment to confidence-building measures that create space to tackle the harder final status issues. Despite years of an elusive peace process, and despite years of on-again, off-again negotiation efforts, and despite real and formidable obstacles, my delegation believes that there is still a chance to make real progress. Kenya has regularly taken note of and welcomed the efforts to lower tensions and provocations and restore calm at the grassroots, official, and regional levels. These efforts need to be reinforced by the cessation of Israeli settlement activity in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, as demanded by the comprehensive pillars of Resolution 2334 and the provisions of Resolution 1860. The mediation efforts of the regional countries will remain critical. The Council should remain seized on the implementation of the 13th of October 2022 Algiers Declaration signed by 14 Palestinian factions and support its translation into actual reconciliation that paves the way for elections to establish a national unity government. As I conclude, Kenya once again urges both parties to avoid unilateral steps that stand in the way of a resumption of a political process as well as peace and stability of the region. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Kenya for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Gabon.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je remercie le coordinateur spécial Thor Wensland pour son exposé. Monsieur le Président, nous sommes préoccupés par l'insécurité persistante entre Israël et la Palestine. Je voudrais m'appesantir sur trois aspects: sécuritaire, humanitaire et politique. Sur le plan sécuritaire, les violences se sont intensifiées ces derniers mois en Cisjordanie occupée et en Israël. Les crispations et tensions se cristallisent à Jérusalem et les positions des partis se radicalisent. Les enfants et les femmes payent un lourd tribut dans les violences aveugles qui touchent les populations civiles. Un Palestinien de 15 ans a été tué le 9 novembre lors d'une opération de l'armée israélienne qui cherchait à sécuriser une visite de politiciens israéliens sur un site religieux en Cisjordanie occupée. Le 14 novembre dernier, une jeune Palestinienne près de Ramallah en Cisjordanie occupée a également perdu la vie. Plus récemment, une école primaire a été démolie par les forces israéliennes à Massafer Yatta. Ce sont de véritables tragédies qui ne doivent pas être banalisées. Ce refus de banaliser les spirales de violence concerne également les attaques subies par les Israéliens, à l'instar de celle qui a entraîné le décès de 3 Israéliens le 15 novembre dans les zones industrielles de la colonie d'Ariel, ainsi que les 2 attaques à la bombe perpétrées à Jérusalem le 23 novembre. Nous condamnons tous ces attaques et tous ces actes de violence. Ce cycle de violence et son flot de diffusion de sang sont insoutenables et les auteurs de ces violences doivent pouvoir répondre de leurs actes devant la justice. Nous appelons chacune des parties à la retenue et à s'abstenir de toute rhétorique belliqueuse de nature à entraver la recherche de la paix. Les activités de colonisation, les expulsions et les démolitions des logements palestiniens doivent cesser. Sur l'épineux dossier des restitutions des dépouilles humaines aux familles, nous appelons les parties à privilégier une issue à même de générer un climat de confiance pour une paix durable. Concernant la situation humanitaire, nous demeurons préoccupés par le risque de discontinuité des services de l'UNRWA, alors que les populations civiles restent très dépendantes de cette aide, notamment dans la bande de Gaza, en raison du blocus. C'est le lieu d'appeler à la levée de ce blocus, conformément à la résolution 1860, et d'inviter la communauté internationale à poursuivre ses efforts en faveur du financement de l'UNRWA. Sur le plan politique, le Gabon réaffirme son attachement à la solution à deux États, vivant en paix et en sécurité le long des frontières sûres et reconnues sur la base des lignes de 1967 avec Jérusalem-Est pour capitale. Nous appelons les parties à reprendre les négociations de bonne foi en vue du rétablissement de la confiance et de donner une chance aux aspirations des peuples palestiniens et israéliens à vivre en paix. Nous rappelons le rôle crucial du Royaume de Jordanie en tant que gardien officiel des lieux saints musulmans de Jérusalem et réitérons notre soutien au roi du Maroc, président du comité d'Al-Quds de l'Organisation de la coopération islamique, dans la préservation du statut particulier de la ville sainte, en tant que symbole du patrimoine commun de l'humanité et des trois religions monothéistes, et en tant que lieu de dialogue et de respect mutuel. Le respect du statu quo des lieux saints est également une exigence de la coexistence pacifique des peuples israéliens et palestiniens. Pour terminer, nous saluons les efforts du coordinateur spécial Thor Wensland en faveur de la paix au Moyen-Orient. Les efforts diplomatiques doivent se poursuivre pour la relance d'un processus de paix durable dans la région. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of Gabon for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Norway.
Thank you, President. And thank you, Special Coordinator Wensland, for your thought-provoking briefing today, and not least for being here in person. I know you have a very, very hectic work going on the ground, so thank you for being here with us. Norway is concerned about continued violence in Israel and Palestine. These ongoing tensions are having major consequences. According to OCHA, 2022 is the deadliest year since 2005 for Palestinians in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. We are particularly concerned by the increasing number of settler attacks, most recently in Hebron. Such violent attacks are unacceptable and fuel tensions. Daily life becomes unbearable for many Palestinians who no longer dare to access their land. Over time, this cohesive environment may force the local population to leave. We urge Israeli authorities to take stronger measures to prevent settler violence and to bring those responsible to account. Norway condemns all violence against civilians, including acts of terrorism. The recent terror attack in Jerusalem are indefensible. We call on both Israelis and Palestinian political leaders to take the necessary step to protect civilians and de-escalate the situation. It is also essential that the historic status quo of the holy sites in Jerusalem is upheld and respected. President, let me reiterate our concern regarding the situation in Masaferyata. Movement restrictions are having severe consequences for the residents in the area. And just last week, Israeli authorities demolished a school, seriously undermining Palestinian children's access to education. We once again urge Israel to revoke all eviction and demolition orders and to comply with their obligation under international humanitarian law. President, we are encouraged by the Palestinian faction's commitment to reconciliation, expressed once again in the Algiers agreement last month. Palestinian reconciliation and unification are essential for stability and to advance the two-state solution. The legitimacy of the PA and its institution must be ensured. We therefore urge all actors to continue with concrete steps to enable Palestinian unity and the holding of elections. In closing, let me remind that many of the negative developments on the ground are symptoms of lack of a political solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And as we heard from the Special Coordinator, status quo is not an option. There is a pressing need for a political horizon and to restart the peace process. We urge the incoming Israeli government to contribute to creating a horizon for peace and to engage with the Palestinian leadership. Norway continues to support the Palestinian state-building effort and a two-state solution. We will continue to work towards this goal. We are convinced that the two-state solution, based on the 1967 borders, is the best way to ensure the rights and safety of both Israelis and Palestinians. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Norway for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Albania.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Special Coordinator Wensland, for your briefing. Let me start by expressing Albania's strong condemnation of the terrorist attacks of Wednesday on Israeli civilians in Jerusalem. These coordinated and sophisticated attacks take us back in darker times and are yet another troubling reminder that terrorists never change, that they are ready to use whatever possibility to sow terror, and that their despicable acts should be met with strong resolve. Albania stands with Israel and its legitimate right to self-defense for its own people and country from all those who have chosen death over life. We further condemn the rockets launched from Gaza Strip towards Israel in the beginning of November. Everyone must understand that fight against terror is not a choice, but a right and a necessity for any country in order to provide safety and security for its own people. The international community must be united in condemning the terrorist attacks. Mr. President, we remain deeply worried by the escalation of violence on the ground, especially of the heightened situation in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. We reiterate our call for the parties to de-escalate and refrain from unilateral steps and actions that, as we know, only fuel further tensions in an already hostile context. We know where tensions lead. We have seen it so many times. We know the consequences we always deplore. Lives of Israelis and Palestinians, including young civilians and children, must be preserved, and both sides must do their utmost to further prevent the escalations. Therefore, what is needed and what we would like to see is concrete engagement to lower tensions, tangible steps that lead to understanding and dialogue. Immediate and full investigation is needed to hold those responsible for innocent victims accountable. Mr. President, Albania believes that in any conflict, the implementation of the international law and international humanitarian law must be fully observed. The protection of civilians is an obligation at any time. We believe that the full implementation of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2601 on safeguarding the right to education in conflict is an obligation of every party in the conflict. Children everywhere have the right to tuition, and attacks against schools, children, and teachers are deplorable. We express our concern that increased demolitions and evictions, as well as the advancement of settlements, do not comply with international law and do not contribute to the peaceful resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So does not the incitement to violence and inflammatory rhetoric against the Israelis, hate speech, and anti-Semitism. For a political horizon to be restored, so much needed for the security of the people from both sides, parties should fully withdraw from counterproductive unilateral actions. In conclusion, let me reiterate Albania's full support for a just and negotiated two-state solution, a safe Israel, where the security of its own people is fully guaranteed, and a viable, independent, and democratic Palestine, living side by side in peace and security and mutual recognition, with Jerusalem as the future shared capital. It is our understanding and belief that this is the only way forward. Anything else is a path to insecurity, violence, and conflict, something we have been witnessing for more than 7 decades. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Albania for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have been following with distress the recent escalation of violence in the region. Brazil strongly condemns the most recent November 23rd terrorist attack on bus stops in Jerusalem and expresses solidarity to the families of the victims. We are alarmed with the high number of civilians killed and injured in the region throughout 2022, including many Israeli and Palestinian children. Mounting violence continues to be exacerbated by provocative actions and inflammatory rhetoric. Brazil urges all parties to maintain the ceasefire and to exercise maximum restraint. We renew our call on all parties to protect civilians and civilian infrastructure and to abide by all legal and moral obligations to spare children from the consequences of hostilities. Acts of terrorism are never justifiable and must immediately halt. Brazil also remains very concerned that places of worship have, on repeated occasions, turned into battlegrounds. We stress that the safety and security of religious sites is an essential component of freedom of religion or belief and should be preserved and respected. Mr. President, Brazil thanks the Special Coordinator for his comprehensive briefing. We agree that the fragility of the situation underscores the urgency of changing dynamics on the ground, while addressing the underlying security and political issues that are fueling the current instability. Concerted efforts are needed to restore a political horizon and resume meaningful negotiations. Brazil remains convinced that a two-state solution within the framework of international law and the resolutions of the Council is still the only way to meet the aspirations of Israelis and Palestinians, ensuring the security of all. But we need to work together towards this goal instead of moving away from it. All actions that reduce the possibilities of achieving this objective must be rethought. UNRWA's Commissioner General Philippe Lazzarini recently recalled that desperation mounts when people, especially the youth, are confronted with poverty, unemployment, and a general lack of prospect. That may bring serious destabilizing effects to the region. The recent outbreaks of cholera in camps are just another consequence of the deteriorating conditions on the ground. In Gaza, in Lebanon, and in Syria, over 80% live below the poverty line. Brazil echoes the calls for renewed efforts to restore UNRWA's capabilities so that it continues to deliver assistance and services in this moment of crisis. The stabilization role of the agency to the region should not be undermined. We also stress the importance of international cooperation in assisting Palestinian authorities in their efforts to build stronger institutions and to foster economic growth. This will not only improve people's lives, but may also contribute to intra-Palestinian reconciliation, which is a crucial step towards stabilization and resumption of a genuine dialogue. In concluding, Mr. President, Brazil once more thanks Mr. Wensland for his continued efforts to de-escalate tensions throughout repeated cycles of violence into 2022. We urgently need to find ways to break those terrible cycles and to promote an effective political process towards sustainable peace in the region. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Brazil for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of the United Arab Emirates.
سيد الرئيس، أشكر السيد تور وينسلاند على إحاطته القيمة. نلتقي اليوم في وقت تمر فيه عملية السلام في الشرق الأوسط بمرحلة دقيقة تتطلب انتباها خاصا من المجتمع الدولي. فمن جانب تشهد الأرض الفلسطينية المحتلة ارتفاعا حادا في وتيرة العنف والتوترات، ومن جانب آخر تزداد الشواغل في الأوساط المحلية والدولية حول مستقبل حل الدولتين في ظل المجريات الراهنة وغياب مسار تفاوضي جاد بين الأطراف. وفي ظل تفاقم هذه الأوضاع السياسية والأمنية التي نتابعها عن كثب، أود التأكيد على المسائل التالية. أولاً، هناك حاجة ماسة لخفض التصعيد والحيلولة دون تفاقم التوترات إلى نقطة لا رجعة فيها، فالتحريض على التطرف والعنف لم ولن يكون في مصلحة أي طرف. أما الدبلوماسية والحوار فيظلان السبيل الوحيد لإنهاء هذا الصراع، ويعني هذا في المقام الأول الامتناع عن أي خطابات أو استفزازات قد تؤجج الأوضاع الهشة، ونذكر جميع الأطراف بضرورة أن تلتزم بمسؤولياتها بموجب القانون الدولي والقانون الإنساني الدولي، خاصة فيما يتعلق بحماية المدنيين. وفي هذا السياق ينبغي وقف الاقتحامات المتكررة للأماكن المقدسة والمناطق السكنية من قبل المستوطنين وما يرافقها من أعمال عنف، ومنها اقتحام عشرات الآلاف من المستوطنين للبلدة القديمة في مدينة الخليل هذا الشهر. ونشير كذلك إلى إدانتنا للهجمات الإرهابية التي وقعت في القدس الأسبوع الماضي. ثانياً، تتطلب المرحلة المقبلة قيادات حكيمة ترى في مسار السلام وحل الدولتين خياراً استراتيجياً لا بديل عنه لإنهاء العنف وضمان مستقبل يعمه الأمن والإزهار لكلا الشعبين. وعليه نحث كلا الجانبين على تكثيف التواصل والتعاون البناء، ونؤكد أن خلق بيئة مواتية للسلام يقتضي عكس الاتجاهات السلبية القائمة على الأرض، وفي مقدمتها وقف بناء وتوسيع المستوطنات التي تشكل انتهاكاً للقانون الدولي وقرارات هذا المجلس. ثالثاً، يتعين علينا في مجلس الأمن توجيه رسالة واضحة بالتزامنا بالمرجعيات الدولية المتفق عليها لإنهاء هذا الصراع، وضرورة عودة الأطراف إلى مفاوضات جادة تفضي إلى حل الدولتين، بحيث تعيش الدولة الفلسطينية جنباً إلى جنب مع إسرائيل في سلام وأمن واعتراف متبادل. ويظل هذا الحل مطلباً للدول العربية التي أكدت مجدداً في قمتها المنعقدة مطلع هذا الشهر في الجزائر على تمسكها بمبادرة السلام العربية. سيد الرئيس، تتطلب الأوضاع الإنسانية الصعبة في الأرض الفلسطينية المحتلة لا سيما في قطاع غزة اهتماماً ودعماً دولياً متواصلاً، خاصة مع وصول مستويات البطالة إلى حوالي 40%. ونؤكد هنا على ضرورة توفير الفرص الاقتصادية والتعليمية للشباب الفلسطيني لتمكينهم من بناء مجتمعاتهم وتنميتها. كما نرحب بالاتفاق مؤخراً على إدخال مواد ذات الاستخدام المزدوج لإصلاح قوارب صيد الأسماك إلى قطاع غزة لأول مرة منذ عام 2007، ونقدر جهود الأمم المتحدة في تيسير هذه الخطوة الهامة التي نأمل أن يتم البناء عليها. وختاماً، لا يفوتنا الإشارة إلى تأكيد صاحب السمو الشيخ محمد بن زايد آل نهيان رئيس الإمارات العربية المتحدة في رسالته بمناسبة اليوم الدولي للتضامن مع الشعب الفلسطيني الشقيق والذي يصادف يوم غد على التزام دولة الإمارات الثابت والتاريخي بدعم الشعب الفلسطيني الشقيق وتطلعاته في إقامة دولته الفلسطينية المستقلة وذات السيادة بناء على حدود 4 يونيو لعام 1967 وعاصمتها القدس الشرقية. وشكراً سيد الرئيس.
I thank the representative of the United Arab Emirates for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Ireland.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Special Coordinator Wensland, for your briefing, which, as you say, sets out a very bleak picture of the situation on the ground. Thor, you warned last month that 20 2022 is on course to become the deadliest year for Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territory since OSHA began documenting in 2005. Unfortunately, as the situation in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, continues to deteriorate, we are moving quickly and closer to this sobering reality. We are deeply disturbed by continued reports of the use of excessive force by Israeli security forces. OSHA has reported that between the 25th of October and 7th of November alone, 15 Palestinians, including 3 children, were killed by Israeli forces in the occupied West Bank. The continuing killing of children is reprehensible. Ireland deplores all attacks against civilians in Israel or the occupied Palestinian territory. We condemn in the strongest terms the attacks on civilians with explosive devices in Jerusalem last week, in which 2 people were killed, and the recent stabbings in which 3 Israeli citizens were killed near the settlement of Ariel. Terrorism and violence are never justified, and they only serve to increase tensions at a time when urgent de-escalation should be the priority. President, every month for the past 2 years in this chamber, Ireland has reiterated the urgent need for a just, inclusive and lasting solution to the conflict. Regrettably, the prospects of meaningful negotiations between the parties on realising a 2-state solution are as remote today as when we joined the Council 2 years ago. It is equally clear that the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory is unsustainable and it is likely to deteriorate further if we do not establish a genuine political horizon. President, I would like to emphasise a number of issues that undermine prospects for the Zoom negotiations that would allow for the realisation of a 2-state solution and the right of Palestinians to self-determination. In particular today, we wish to stress the urgent need for accountability in the occupied Palestinian territory. Accountability is a cornerstone of a political horizon and a meaningful peace process. The pervasive culture of impunity in response to excessive use of force by Israeli security forces, as well as to incidents of settler violence, is deeply concerning. So long as this culture of impunity persists and the root causes of conflict remain unaddressed, conflict and violence will continue throughout the occupied Palestinian territory and Israel. Ireland calls for accountability in respect of all civilian deaths. We reiterate our call for an independent investigation into the killing of Palestinian-American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. We note the decision by the United States to conduct its own investigation into Abu Akleh's death, and that this has been welcomed by the Palestinian Authority and by her family. We also underline the need for a full, independent investigation into the death of Palestinian human rights defender and activist Nizar Banat, following his arrest by Palestinian Authority security forces. Furthermore, against the backdrop of the deteriorating situation on the ground, it is important that the international community supports Palestinian efforts in seeking legal responses to the occupation. In this regard, Ireland welcomes the adoption by the 4th Committee of the General Assembly of a draft resolution which included a request for an advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice. President, the issue of Israeli settlements is also a fundamental concern, and I know we will have the opportunity to address this in more detail next month. Ireland remains deeply concerned by developments in Masafar Yatta, including the recent demolition of a donor-funded school by the Israeli security forces. Let me reiterate that Ireland urges Israel to cease evictions and demolitions, including of donor-funded structures, in line with its obligations under international humanitarian law. Mr. President, the ongoing Israeli blockade continues to exacerbate the humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip. UNICEF has reported that over 1 million children in Gaza today have constrained access to essential services, including food, water, education and healthcare. We renew our call on Israel to lift the blockade of Gaza. We deplore Israel's continued refusal to grant visas for OHCHR and other UN staff, which further restricts vital human rights and humanitarian engagement. We also remain alarmed at the reduced space for civil society and NGOs in the occupied Palestinian territory. We commend UNRWA for its vital support to Palestinian refugees throughout the region, and we strongly welcome the recent renewal of UNRWA's mandate for 3 years until the 30th of June 2026. Finally, President, let me reiterate that Ireland will, for the rest of our Council term and beyond, continue to call for accountability for all civilian deaths. Ireland stands ready to support all efforts to achieve a just and lasting two-state solution based on international law. This represents the only sustainable prospect that will enable Palestinians and Israelis to live in peace, a peace that is not only urgent but long, long overdue. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Ireland for their statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Ghana. I thank you, Special Coordinator Thor Wensland, for your briefing on the Middle East situation relating to the question of Palestine, and also commend your efforts in respect of the mandate. It is regrettable that after many decades of the Council's engagement on this question, today's briefing continues to show that we are far from our aspirations. Ghana remains deeply concerned about the lack of progress in finding a just and lasting solution to the protracted conflict and the deteriorating security situation in the West Bank and in other towns in the occupied Palestinian territories, caused by communal violence, arbitrary arrests and detentions of mostly Palestinian youths, demolitions and building of new settlements by Israeli settlers, and political and social arrests in the occupied Palestinian territories. We are equally concerned about the sharp increase in violent attacks on unarmed Israeli civilians, which has resulted in fatalities, kidnapping of innocent Israelis in Jerusalem and other Israeli settlements. The current situation in the region does not only negatively affect the lives of Israelis and Palestinians, but that of millions of people in the Middle East region, and many other people all over the world who are denied of the benefits of the natural and human resources that the region is blessed with. Ghana remains concerned about the dire humanitarian situation faced by Palestinian refugees across the occupied Palestinian territory, especially in the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. It is regrettable that children, women, and the aged continue to suffer the most devastating impact of protracted conflicts. We join others in condemning the recent increase in the spate of violent clashes across the Middle East region, which, according to UNICEF, has brought untold suffering and fatalities to children in the region. We emphasize the need to ease humanitarian access to allow inhabitants in the occupied Palestinian territories to have access to basic supplies and a dignified life as a shared international responsibility, pending a just and durable solution in accordance with international law, including relevant resolutions of the United Nations Security Council. We commend the efforts of all humanitarian agencies on the ground, particularly UNRWA and its staff, for working under difficult circumstances to provide critical assistance to the Palestinian refugees, especially the aged, women, and children who constitute the most vulnerable in the agency's area of operations. While solidarizing with the families of at least 21 persons who were killed and injured when a fire tore through an apartment complex in the crowded Jabalia camp in the Gaza Strip, we welcome the Israeli authorities' offer to lift Gaza's normal travel restrictions to allow survivors to seek medical treatment in Israel in response to a request from the Palestinian Authority. We call on the leadership of Israel, Palestine, and all stakeholders in the region to work towards good neighborliness and continue to engage in a meaningful and transparent manner for significant policy changes on both sides. In concluding, I wish to reiterate Ghana's commitment to the Council's collective aspiration for Israel and Palestine to live peacefully side by side as two sovereign states with Jerusalem as the shared capital. We look forward to the renewed and constructive dialogue on a political horizon that would ultimately lead to the two-state solution. I thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. I now invite Council members to informal consultations to continue our discussions on the subject. The meeting is adjourned.
Hi, how are you? How are you doing? Okay. I think, as you know, that the open segment of the Security Council has concluded, and members of the Security Council went to the consultation chamber to, I suppose, ask questions of Mr. Thor Wensland. One can make the observation that Thor Wensland and almost all speakers agreed on conveying a very bleak picture of the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem. And reports of the UN, the OCHA reports, concluded, which many speakers referred to that the year 2022 is the bloodiest year against Palestinians in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem. So if that is the assessment before the Security Council, then who is stopping the Security Council from implementing resolutions, including 904, to provide protection for the civilian population, for the Palestinian civilian population? Just to analyze and describe the situation without acting is not elevating the situation of the Security Council to what is needed. And if many to say that they want a political horizon, which we agree with them, and that we should open doors for meaningful peaceful processes that would lead to the end of occupation and the actualization of the two-state solution, then there are many options. One, which was proposed by President Abbas several times before the Security Council and the General Assembly, to convene an international conference to begin the process that would lead to the implementation of the consensus in the Security Council for having two-state solutions on the basis of the 1967 borders and on the basis of international law and relevant UN resolutions, so that we can have peace based on justice and the will of the international community. But the Security Council, which is a mighty force, the most powerful force in the UN for the maintenance of international peace and security, is to describe without acting is pathetic. And it is not elevating itself to what needs to be done. We, the victims, the Palestinians, every time we try to urge them to act on the basis of their resolutions and international law, and they don't act. And when we put before them initiative such as the calling for an international conference to have a political horizon, or to recognize and to admit the state of Palestine so that we can act on the consensus on the two states, we find parties blocking such efforts. But yet they reiterate, we are committed to the two-state solution. If you keep repeating it, and we see the occupying forces, the Israeli occupying forces, destroying the two-state solution before our eyes without you doing anything to defend and protect the two-state solution, these words become meaningless. They do not have the force and power and the intentions as people who say them. Now, of course, the big elephant in the room, which they did not refer to it, is why is this year the bloodiest? Why is people are frustrated everywhere, including in the Security Council itself? The reason is extremism on the side of the Israeli occupying side is in the increase. Because when you have the largest number of Palestinian civilians killed in the West Bank and East Jerusalem since 2005, it is as a result of the increase of extremism on the Israeli side, whether the settler extremism, settler terrorism, or the forces that won the election in Israel itself, including fascists, who will be, once we see the results of the formation of the new Israeli government, there will be fascists holding cabinet positions in the Israeli side, which means that this extremism and this increase of the attacks against the Palestinian people will increase. The Security Council has to act, and it has to act to protect the Palestinian people, has to act in not dealing with fascists who will be in the Israeli government, and has to act in order to open doors for meaningful political process, which means that the Security Council has to act in a different way that they have demonstrated so far, because the situation will move from bad to worse. It will deteriorate further, and points as they were raised by Thor Wensland, while they are good in abstract, unless they are acted upon them, and other ideas, including the ones that I referred to in terms of protection and political horizon, will be just only words that will not deal with the situation as it is deteriorating before our eyes. It is a very bleak situation, but our people will not surrender, will not raise white flags, will defend their rights, will defend themselves, and will continue their march to put an end to this occupation, to this system of discrimination, to this apartheid that we are living under, and to enjoy freedom and dignity in our own free and independent state of Palestine, contiguous, sovereign, as there is global consensus on these things. I'm terribly sorry to share these things with you on the eve of moving into the holiday, but this is the reaction of the Palestinian side. There are more than one Palestinian leader saying that there will be some changes to the strategies and the tactics deployed by the Palestinian leadership in order to protect our national rights, and in order to protect our people, and to protect the attainment of the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people. I don't think that there is need for questions.
One question. Ambassador, thank you. Tissam Azim, Al-Arabi Al-Jadid newspaper. You talk about strategies that the Palestinian Authority and Palestinian people are planning to have. Could you explain more, given the fact that you are going to face a very, as you said, also a fascist government in which there are Kahanist, settlers, etc. So what are these steps that you're talking about? Thank you.
Well, one of these steps that we have undertaking is taking the entire component of the question of Palestine and occupation, and the essence of the system that we live under occupation. We're taking that to the International Court of Justice. That is one step in that direction, but we will be exploring and studying further the details of this potential new Israeli government and its platform and its individuals, and what they will be doing to the Palestinian people, to resort to further steps that the Palestinian leadership and the Palestinian people will agree to. But we will not accept to be as paralyzed as we've seen in the Security Council. It is our duty to keep coming up with creative ideas in order, and these are peaceful ideas, legal ideas, political ideas, and diplomatic ideas, to defend ourselves in this compound in the United Nations, Of course, the leadership and our people will take the necessary steps and the strategies and the tactics as it relates to the life and defending our people in the occupied territory, including East Jerusalem. Thank you.
Why is the United States not supporting Navi Pilay's Commission of Inquiry?
Well, this is a good question to ask the representative of the United States.
So what's your thoughts on it?
Good afternoon. We're delighted to be joined by Thor Wensland, Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process. We're just reading the Security Council. We'll have a few words for you, then we'll take a few questions, and then we'll do the briefing. Thor, please.
Thanks. Today I briefed the Council slightly different from what I normally do. It was not a kind of listing up of events that will come in the report on 2334 later in December. In written report from the Secretary General. I looked at what kind of elements we need to address in order to change the situation from where we are on a different trajectory. I told them about the conflict drivers that are the ones we know. It's relating to settlement, expansion, eviction, demolitions, and the drivers must be addressed, including the very precarious situation we have at Haram Sharif and on the holy sites. But there are some major trends that are really hitting us. Demography is running faster than politics. Demography means basically the following. In Gaza, in some few years, we will have 2.7 million people, and we will have 3.7 million at the West Bank. The space available at the West Bank is shrinking for the establishment of a continuous Palestinian state. In the kind of areas, in particular between Jordan Valley and on the plain on the top, we can locate most of the fractions and the conflict zones in and around Nablus. Jenin is a particular case, but we have it in Hebron and we have it around Jerusalem and Bethlehem. These are the key conflict zones that emanates of the congestion of an growing Palestinian population and the expansion of the settlement in space. Finally, is about the strengthening of the Palestinian Authority. That is a superbly important issue. The Palestinians are losing the donors for the lack of attention from the international community. They have to shrink their activity, and they cannot, with this growing population, deliver the services for the Palestinian people as they could have done and as they did effectively 10 years ago. We are in a very precarious situation whereby the lack of social services to a fast increasing population, and a population pyramid that is staggering, is putting superb challenges in front of the PA. The PA is one of the more important structures that came out of the Oslo Agreement almost 30 years back. And if we are not keeping that intact in a very constructive way and engaging with them very constructively, this will further aggravate the situation on the ground. The Council is very much on par with the overall objective of what we need to do and not to do. And I'm very happy for that, because even without statements coming out of the Council, the countries in the Council are very much on par with what I said to you now. That is also the line of the Palestinian Authority. And obviously, I discussed what I was going to say to the Council, both to the Israeli side and to the Palestinian side before I came here today. Any questions?
Thank you. Ibtisam Azam.
Thank you. My name is Ibtisam Azim from Al Arabi Al Jadid newspaper. I have two questions. First, do you believe that the international community is doing enough to hold the Israeli occupation power accountable and to put enough pressure on them, given the fact that if you look at the American giving $4 billion yearly in military aid, and the Europeans having special status for Israel, and so there is no accountability to the occupation. Why would Israel even take any steps to end the occupation? And then the second question, do you have any comments on the fact that in the new Israeli government that's about to be built, there are fascist and Kahana sympathizers and believers? Thank you.
Well, I mean, it's for any country of the UN and for the international community as a whole to stress the accountability of all sides, including Israel. Let me be very clear on that. And it has to do with the way things are moving on the ground, and the terrible loss of lives that we have been seeing spiking this year. That is by far higher in the West Bank in particular than it has been for a long time. I would also stress that Israel has been exposed to terror attacks in an intensity that we haven't seen for a very long time, the most recent one in Jerusalem. And these things combined, I mean, are really fueling the tension. There are also some unresolved issues relating to bodies not being handed over to families, both Israeli bodies that are being held, but there are also a huge number of Palestinian bodies that are held also on the Israeli side. These are very sensitive issues, and they need to be addressed. When it comes to the new Israeli government, I mean, we should take into account one thing. It's the Israeli population that are electing their own government. Then it is a process of the internal dynamics in Israel that put the people, different people in position. But I can assure you one thing, UN will work with this government one way or the other. And we are working with the systems on both sides, and that's how it is. We are not kind of putting any judgment of that. Those who are elected are elected. Those who will get into position will have the position, and UN will deal with that one way or the other.
Thank you. I-24 Dave.
Thanks for doing this. Two questions for you. Have you had any discussions yet or talks with the presumptive government of Israel? And secondly, the Israeli ambassador a month or two ago had criticism that your briefings and the general tone of the Security Council briefings got too bogged down in the minutia of the conflict. Your presentation today was much more broad, much different than it's usually been. Is there any correlation there between that criticism and your presentation today and the process going forward from your office?
No, not at all. Not whatsoever. The way we have done this today was planned from my side and from the side of my team way back. I wanted now, based on what the work we have been doing, in particular on de-escalation, to move forward with a broader framework. I have hinted to that framework in the last two presentations I had to the Council, but this time I developed it further, and this is the basis on which we will be working as the UN. And this framework is properly discussed on both sides.
Did you have any talks with the presumptive government yet?
No, I'm not starting to work with the government before the government is in place.
Oh, thank you. This is Betül Yürük with the Turkish news agency Anadolu. Two questions. How do you plan to deal with the incoming Netanyahu government? Will you have a different approach from the previous government? And what do you expect this new government to do in order to achieve the two-state solution? Thanks.
Well, I've been dealing with Netanyahu government when I took up this position. I was dealing with the Netanyahu government when we had a de-escalation in Gaza in May last year. And I've been dealing with the Netanyahu government in handling de-escalation and the steps to open Gaza further. So I will stress that what the outgoing government is doing is in line with that and further developing that same thing. I understand your question also because there are different voices in the new government that is public on going in different directions. I will have to deal with that. And that's what I'm going to do. I want to consolidate what we have achieved so far and developing it further for the reason I mentioned in the beginning. We have very little choice but to find a solution where we have a proper divide. What I mean with that, a divide that can create a prospect for two states. I see nobody, neither in Israel nor on the Palestinian side, that want this mix we have now. The mix we have now, without the divide, is a recipe for instability, conflict, and escalation that would not be limited to Israel and Palestine, but that may easily have broader and wider regional ramifications.
Just a quick follow-up, Steph, if I may. Do you think it's going to be harder for you to deal with this government?
It's hard to deal with any government in the Middle East.
Kristen Salumi from Al Jazeera English, thanks. To put it bluntly, what do you see as the greatest impediment to moving forward? And could there be a role for the quartet in moving things along?
Well, for the moment, the quartet is in a difficult and tight corner, as you know very well. I would very much have liked to see that different, but the realities are as they are. Obviously, me as the special coordinator needs to keep all these lines open, and everybody knows that I'm doing that. So that work will continue. You know, there is a whole set of issues that are very difficult to deal with here. I'm not going to pick and choose on who is the more difficult one or the less difficult one. But I would warn against any major expectation that we can make a quick fix with a package just as it looks now. We will need some time to get around the corners here and see where we can and how we can maneuver both with the Palestinian Authority and the PLO on the one side and with the new Israeli government on the other. I mean, this world is like it is. The Middle East is like it is. And the Israelis and the Palestinians are like they are. So I'm in the middle of this, and I've said yes to this job, and I can deal with it.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Dual-use materials that you said are entering Gaza for the first time. What are some examples?
Oh, and that is?
Of the dual-use materials.
That's very easy. It's engines for the fishing fleet. It is material for repair of boats that has not been in for a long time.
Excuse me, may I ask you just about elections in terms of the Palestinian side? Do you think that new elections would have any impact? I mean, Israel changes their governments pretty quickly, pretty often, but that doesn't seem to be the case on the other side. Do you think that you know, an election might stir things up in terms of?
UN has been advocating the fact that elections should be held in Palestine. We will continue to do that, and we will make our effort and support behind any initiative that can lead to broader parliamentary elections. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a line.